Alright guys, before we get started, I just want to quickly plug the one-to-one tutoring that I offer. Wow, so cool, awesome. Okay, enjoy the video.
Alright, guys, today we are looking at the basics of Macbeth. Oh, I did not write that very well. So, we're going to start where I like to start with these, which is form. Because if you don't know what type of text you're writing about in your exam, you're kind of already behind. So, let's get you back up to scratch. Form. Macbeth is a play because all of the Shakespeare texts in the syllabus are plays, so that should be quite easy to remember. Shakespeare, he's a playwright. And it is a dramatic play. More specifically, though, it's a tragedy. Okay, so you might have already heard this, or if this is you're completely new to the text, a tragedy. I mean, what would we describe as a tragedy now? A tragedy would be something like a dog dying, or someone getting run over, just something really unexpected and sad that we feel bad about when we hear it. It strikes a chord with us. It makes us upset. So Macbeth is a tragedy. So when we, the audience, are watching it, we are expected to feel something about the events, probably something negative about the events. We aren't meant to be really happy with how things are going. It's meant to be distressing. So we already know that before we've even looked at the plot. It's a tragedy, so it's going to be quite tragic. It's going to be quite downbeat. When we're actually defining a tragedy from a kind of play angle, Aristotle was actually the first to define it as like a genre of a play. And he kind of put like sort of three elements that you need for it to be a tragedy. So one is you need a protagonist, and often they're kind of royal descent, I suppose. So they might be like a king or a queen or a prince. So one, you have your protagonist. Two, that protagonist has to have a fatal flaw. Okay? So when we're talking about a fatal flaw, you may hear it described as a hamartia. Hamartia. And it's a Greek word. It comes from from Greece. And your fatal flaw, your hamartia, is basically something that is going to end up leading the protagonist to tragedy. It is something that they can't avoid, and it is something that, as the term suggests, fatal, could lead to their death. It is very serious, and it is an unavoidable fault within themselves. And so this fatal flaw leads to a downfall. So it often goes from a success to a failure, and like I kind of alluded to, often death. And when the audience watches this downfall, Aristotle said that this creates a sort of purge. So purge, kind of disgusting example. When you throw up, you are purging what's inside and you are letting it out. So when you're purging your feelings, you are letting the feelings that you've kept within out. And it's kind of a purge of these feelings of fear and pity. And this is described as catharsis. Aristotle describes this as catharsis. And so when we're thinking about kind of authorial intention, because we should always be thinking about authorial intention if we really want to get those higher grades, we have to dig deeper below the surface level. The play is already a tragedy. So whenever we're reading any of these characters and anything they're doing, it's all well and good saying, well, Macbeth does this because he really wants to be king, and maybe he's not so wrong for that. But Shakespeare doesn't want you to leave with that impression. So when we're asking about like what the author wants you to think about the characters, we aren't meant to think that Macbeth is doing the right thing. We are meant to disagree with him. His story is meant to be a warning for us, really. And we are meant to feel a feeling of catharsis, a kind of relief. It's something very, it can be quite calming because you've let those feelings out. And it's also this relief of, well, at least my life isn't as bad as Macbeth's. At least I haven't gotten myself into that kind of situation. So this is the kind of three tenets of a tragedy. And so I'm going to try and apply this to our little Macbeth here. So here he is. He's got his little dagger and he's got his crown that he stole. So there you go. There's Macbeth, perfect. And he is our protagonist. So we have a protagonist. So that is part one of being a tragedy. You have to have a protagonist. So tick. And he is not yet a royal, but he is a noble. And he is a thane already. He goes from being one type of thane to being the thane of Cawdor. So he does have kind of noble lineage. So he's a protagonist. He's not necessarily royal, but he is quite powerful already. And he does become the king because of his fatal flaw. So he has a fatal flaw. And his fatal flaw is ambition. So that's a tick right there. And this ambition leads him to his downfall because he already had a lot of power. He was already Thane of Cawdor. Some could say that the witches at the beginning who tell him you will be king never tell him that he has to kill the current king in order to become king himself. So you could say that his ambition causes him to kind of jump the gun and become king unnaturally, kind of taking it upon himself. And that is what leads to consequence. So you could kind of argue that. So his ambition is absolutely his fatal flaw, because even when he becomes king, he keeps killing because his ambition just makes him want more and more control and more power. So we got 1, 2, and then this downfall that we have leads to this catharsis. So the play also has catharsis to the audience. So the audience is necessary for any type of play, and they are part of the form. So a tragedy cannot exist without an audience who experiences it. And this is why your teachers will bang on so much about authorial intention and what did the author mean and what do they want to show you and what effect did this have on the audience or the reader, because these things aren't written or performed to no one. They aren't expecting no one to ever read them or see them. They are expecting people to have a reaction, and they are building their stories around this idea that people will react to them and people have feelings about them. And so when we're thinking about Shakespeare here, because he's our author, we say, what does Shakespeare intend? And this is a very broad question, but we're going to think about this when it comes to Macbeth's death. From a form perspective, you may have already figured it out. From a perspective of form, Macbeth must die because he is the protagonist. He has the fatal flaw, and the audience needs to feel catharsis, and so he has to have some kind of punishment for his actions. And you can argue, well, yeah, he could, be punished, but he doesn't have to die. In the original definition, they don't always die. They sometimes just fail. He could have just lost all his power and be kind of cast aside. And this is why you don't just want to take one angle with a text. You want to kind of look at multiple angles. So this is kind of Shakespeare's intention from the angle of form, but you can also look at it from the angle of context. And from a contextual perspective, there was this thing, and it was called the divine right of kings. And this basically said that whoever was put on the throne, God has decided that they must rule and they must be on the throne. And so to overthrow them, to commit regicide, which is the killing of a king, to overthrow a king, you are going against God. And therefore you are not only disobeying your king, you are disobeying the king of the entire universe, God. And this was a prevalent belief at the time, in the era when Shakespeare was writing. And so for such a great crime, it wouldn't be enough. You could argue it wouldn't be enough for Shakespeare to just have Macbeth fail. Macbeth must die for his crimes, because it is a warning. It is warning the audience to not repeat Macbeth's crimes. Okay, so that is a very basic look at kind of a bit of form, a bit of context, and a bit of look at Macbeth's character and why Shakespeare writes him the way he does. Because he doesn't have to give Macbeth a fatal flaw. He doesn't have to make him die at the end, but he does, because he is obedient to the form that he chooses, a tragedy, and he is also obedient to the context of the time. And when we go into context a bit more, we can talk about why he really can't glorify someone who would murder a king. But we're going to leave that there for today. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope it was useful. And if there's anything else you're a bit confused on, you want more detail on, please write a comment, let me know, and I can make another video that explains it better.